attending meetings in person at City Hall, and how to find the full meeting materials, applications, and staff reports on the city's website. I do note that we have a quorum. Brandon, do you have any announcements?
The only announcement I have is a reminder that our next meeting on December 12th is a regular meeting, but following that, our normal study session on December 26th is canceled. However, the City Council is having a acknowledgement for city commissions on December 18th, and if you've not yet received an invite, one will be forthcoming.
Ooh, thank you, a party. If we get invited. Public forum. If there's anybody in the audience who wishes to speak, please fill out the speaker request form. That's the pink sheet located at the back of the room, and you will be recognized by the chair to provide your public comments. I do not show anyone has signed up to speak. Unfinished business. Approval of findings and conclusions for climate-friendly and equitable communities parking code amendments, PA-T3-2023-00006 is up before us. Does anybody have any discussion, or would you like to move to make a motion to approve?
The only comment I would make before we approve is that unless staff already caught it, there's a lot of typos in this document.
We'll go through it before it goes to City Council and before signature for Lisa Werner to make sure that those typos are all removed.
The ones that I kept catching are all in the headers for some reason.
Okay.
And we received today the actual draft of the ordinance to codify these changes.
And I will note that the ordinance itself, the Scribner's errors or typos that were identified by Commissioner Phillips have all been corrected, as well as the recommendation from the Planning Commission to modify the section relating to ADA accessible parking spaces in the C1D zone has been incorporated into the draft that will be presented to Council on December 5th.
Do I hear a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Moved and seconded to approve the findings and conclusions for climate-friendly and equitable communities parking code amendments, PA-T3-2023-00006. All those, Michael, will you do a roll call?
Yes, if I can say yes, even though I wasn't at the last meeting.
Yeah, if you watched the meeting and are familiar with what transpired, you could say yes, but
okay.
If not, you would abstain.
Yes.
Okay.
I reviewed the package in lieu of attending the meeting. I vote yes.
Having been here, I say yes.
I was in attendance and I say yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. It passed. That's good. So it's on to the council. Our next item is other business, and we have an information session with Parks, Trails, Open Space Map Amendment. It's a part of the city's of Ashland's comprehensive plan, and I would like to acknowledge that we received a letter from Amy Gunter about one of the sites on the map. And move my stuff out of the way. Thank you. Derek, would you like to introduce this item? And
sure. So this item is your first look through a study session at a draft Parks and Open Space map that the Parks Commission and subcommittees have been working on for close to 2 years now, I think. This is hoped to replace the Parks and Open Space map that was formally adopted by the council back in 2002. there was a light update that was never formally adopted in 2012. So this is really dealing with updating data that's 21 years old. So, and we have Parks Director, I'm just blanking.
Leslie Nope.
Leslie Eldridge, wow. I knew that and it just totally blanked. Here to present and answer questions. And we do have, I have a PowerPoint up if you need anything on it. It's just the maps.
Perfect. So if anyone would like me to project either the 2002 or the draft map, I'll be happy to do so. Hello, I'm happy to be here. My name is Leslie Eldridge, Interim Parks and Recreation Director, and my purpose here is to receive comments and feedback on this draft of the updated Parks and Open Space map that you have in your packet. As I wanted to first thank Derek and Brandon for all their support as we go through this process. And as Derek stated, this is part of the Ashland Comprehensive Plan, and the hope is to replace the 21-year-old version that is currently in there. The map, the Parks and Open Space map guides APRC land acquisition and designates potential uses and values. So maybe for a sports court or a neighborhood park, values might include conservation values or connectivity values, and I'll talk a little bit more about those as we go along here. So a little bit on the history of this particular version, the draft that you're looking at. In May 2022, the Parks Commission created a subcommittee of stakeholders and just general community members. We met, I think, 6 or 7 times and kind of poured over actually the 2012 light update that Derek alluded to. This was a map update that Parks Commissioners had made, but for one reason or another, never made it through the Planning Commission and City Council adoption process, but it had been used in internal discussions and strategy and land acquisitions from that time. It wasn't until, and from May 22, it was about September of this year that the subcommittee concluded their deliberations and their recommendations and brought that draft to the Ashland Parks and Recreation Commission, went to a study session and then a business meeting, October 5th. It was recommended unanimously to be reviewed by this body here. So back in 2002, the draft that is currently in the Ashland Comprehensive Plan, there was a study done that showed that Ashland had less land per 1,000 people of population than cities like Roseburg, Medford, and Klamath Falls. So in the 90s and aughts, Ashland actually had very low access and low to parkland, as well as low acreage as compared to our density. And at that time, the goal in the 2002 map was really about using the food and beverage money to purchase lands to create parks and to achieve a goal of having a park within a quarter mile of every resident living within city limits. So there's a very clear purpose to that 2002 map and the strategies behind it. It was about acquiring land and making parks. That has changed very much. The values and the goals of parks have changed, and this new map represents those changes in our values and goals. So the primary drivers that you'll see in the draft before you today include conservation values, so conserving and preserving riparian zones and forest lands, as well as connectivity, primarily transportation, trail, biking, pedestrian connectivity between the watershed and across areas. Like the TID is a perfect example of a highly desired connectivity, kind of linear park that our community would love to see preserved. There's also of this sort of synergistic value of multiple benefits. So when we look at forest land, for example. We're working with the Wildfire Division to attempt to achieve multiple benefits through fuels management and wildfire management, as well as reaping those recreational values as well. So we have the goal of achieving sort of multiple values across city departments. Let's see. I have a few key points, and then I'm happy to go through the map sort of one by one, or folks can ask questions that concern them. I also received some questions from Brandon and Derek that I can address as well. But just a few key points. You are probably familiar with many of them. There are several ways to achieve the goals in the parcels that are identified here for acquisition. It does not have to be outright purchase, but it could be outright purchase. Could also be grant funding, securing easements, either securing legal easements. We could pay for them, or they could be donated. Donations of land have occurred and do occur, as well as requirements from private development, either maintaining private open land or parks, or dedicating those to parks. And maybe I'm missing some, but those are a few that I can think of. Another important note, this map is to be used in conjunction with the APRC Trails Master Plan. So on the map, you'll see this blue, light blue, kind of cloudy layer that is really the backbone of the Trails Master Plan. It shows the corridors and the connectivity that was identified during that Trails Master Plan. And so when you look at the draft map, you may say, why are there no parcels on the east side of the TID? And this, this may, I've gone through a lot of iterations of how the best way to portray this, so I'm definitely open to feedback on how this appears on the map. But the way that we've approached it is that we've identified a lot of specific parcels that are and areas that are important and meet the mission of parks and meet those values and goals. But we also have this trail master plan that is really just denoted by those connectivity corridors. And those are also of interest to us. So anything that might be within there is contained in the Trails Master Plan and would be open to assessment as to whether it would be an appropriate parcel for an easement or for purchase or some other type of way of gaining access. There is redundancy in the system, so we have identified 2 areas, for example, where potential sports fields could exist. Does not necessarily mean that we are seeking to acquire both of those. It means that we have no idea when or if those properties might be available, and so there's more than what we need in this plan based on sort of fate and what things become of opportunistic ability to get land for certain purposes. And then the last thing, I guess I sort of mentioned that parks, for all intents and purposes, have really declared victory on our goal of having a park within a quarter mile of every home. Currently there's only one piece of land identified in this draft that is really for a neighborhood park. And that is, let's see, let me look at, I think it's 18, the Tolman Creek Mistletoe area is the only place that we have identified within city limits that could use a neighborhood park, and the rest of them have sort of have different needs and goals around them. So I'll stop there and maybe look to the commission to give me some direction on how you'd like to proceed to discuss the draft. We also have 2 maps. One is a comparison map, so you can see what has been removed from 2002 and what has been added. So we're basically pretending the 2012 light update never existed, and we're comparing what is currently in the Ashland Comprehensive Plan versus what we're proposing now. So you see that I think it's the very bright orange, I should really have one of these in front of me. So comparison map does not have the signature bar, so that's the easiest way to tell the difference. But yes, so in the kind of block orange shade, original plan no longer seeking, this is our way to show you what has been removed, what is no longer on the current plan. We've been calling that the comparison map. And then the formal map has those properties that are removed. They've disappeared now, so we're only looking at the official map at what is currently city land, currently APRC managed land, and the land that we are identifying for acquisition.
Do you mind being interrupted in the middle of this?
No, I'm done. It's not an interruption.
So one of the things I notice, and I'm curious about, is that some of the properties that are identified on this one that has numbers on it.
Is that the 2002?
They both have
That
numbers.
looks like the.
Oh, so is that the 2002?
I think that looks like the old.
2012. Okay, sorry.
And that map is a little. I will say it's a bit confusing. It took us. There are some.
It is, but I think it's the same. It's actually Amy Gunter sent a letter about that one, but
Right.
it's 18. Okay, so it's 18 on the new map, and
7 on the.
7 on the new map.
18 right there is a particular piece of property, not the one Amy talked about.
Oh,
So-
okay.
And
Hold on,
I know that it's privately owned by somebody that ultimately wants to develop it. So in those cases, you're just kind of future tripping, like if the city could get their hands on a piece, then they want to.
I'm still looking for 18.
Oh, sorry, it's on
18
Hamilton
is on
Creek.
Tolman Creek Road or Mistletoe.
Yes.
Jason Croman.
It's number 7, I think.
Well,
Is-
she's
Yeah, it's
referring
on
to
the edge
one.
of Croman.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, down there at the bottom.
It's between
Oh.
Hamilton Creek and...
So that, yes, I think the answer to your question is yes. What commissioners and the subcommittee said is they don't need all of that land. It's a question of what in that area, those are potential within that area that may be available.
It's adjacent to riparian and... Okay.
Correct.
So I have a comment and a question. So my comment is that I like the way you're transitioning from the legacy plan to this kind of middle plan that's a comparison that shows what was in 2002, and what's added and what would be taken away. So I like the composite kind of bridge. And then,
That was all Brandon. He suggested
well,
it.
there you go. So I like what you
He's good at this.
suggested, Brandon. And then,
Our GIS department.
yeah, there you go.
Oh, and I forgot to thank Leah. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Leah. Leah did so much work on this. I had to interject, sorry.
Yeah, no, it is hard because there's a lot going on. And so I think in going through the narrative tells a story. I think the maps do a nice job of taking somebody like me who would rather look at pictures than read words, and it helps give context to that. So thanks for the detailed work there. So that's the comment. The question is, and I'll set it up with acknowledging that I think what you said earlier in your remarks about the integration of work that we need to do with regard to forest management and the potential to integrate that within the parks framework is really important. So the question is, do you see formalizing that? I would love to see more. I don't know that more has to be presented in this plan or in this iteration. But how do you envision the future state of that evolving?
You can tell me if this is what you're thinking. We actually don't have a codified, but we have in practice a very close relationship with Wildfire Division and the Forest Land, and codified relationship with Forest Lands Commission. We now have a Trails Advisory Committee, and we work extremely closely and Chris, particularly Chris Chambers, is very involved with, and we've talked about all these parcels, 12, 13, 16, 17, with Chris, with the idea of, does this provide benefits in terms of fuels management? And so if that's what you're referring to, so Wildfire Division actually, for all intents and purposes, they manage almost the vast majority of the open space for parks. So we do it in partnership. We have a small forestry program, but we don't have even close to the capacity to do the kind of fuels management that AFR and the fire department do. So we do already have a very copacetic working relationship in that regard. And I don't know, there's been an understanding between Parks and Wildfire Division for a long time that we met, and then just recently we sort of we created this Trails Committee so that APRC is dealing with recreational and use issues, and the Wildfire Division and Forest Lands are really acting as sort of the environmental experts and the fuels management experts. And both of these are sort of required when we make any decision. I think we could do better to codify that relationship a bit more, because I think it's been mostly done in practice, but that is currently the way that we operate. Is that sort of what you're asking?
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I don't know. I think there's an opportunity to really tell that story in a way that provides some really good messaging, both for parks, for Chris Chambers and Wildland Fire, and for the city. It's so important to the local economy, to issues related to smoke, and also habitat. That it's just an opportunity. And I think, given that you're doing it, I just recommend that it's a story we find a way to tell.
I think that's a great suggestion. I agree.
Any other? I'm sure Doug has.
Go ahead.
I feel like I'm getting a reputation. Leslie, I have no particular knowledge about Parks and Rec's mission. Just haven't had the time to be involved with it and understand it. And I'm not quite clear on what the scope of the effort is that takes place, given the list that I was looking at here. So this is all brand new to me, and it's just a question that I have as I look at it. One of your points being that you would like to see a conservation easement on the south slope of Grizzly. Can you explain to me how that falls within your scope?
Yeah, there's a few things. Actually, it's first is the view shed. It's called aesthetics in the Ashland Comprehensive Plan, but one value that is important to Ashland or that we've identified, are the beautiful sweeping views of open space and mountains and ridges. And Grizzly Peak, that south side of Grizzly Peak, represents a critical view shed for our town. Additionally, there's long been a desire to establish recreational trails. I've heard so many people talk about the dream of being able to go from the top of Mount Ashland to the top of Grizzly on single track. So there are recreational values, and of course the city of Ashland, not Parks, but the city of Ashland owns the Imperatrice property, the property that the gun club is on. It's a common practice for cities to own or have easements on land in the surrounding or outside city limits. So this would represent one of those sort of out of the city limits, but still kind of feels like part and parcel of our town and our valley, and these things that sort of make Ashland Ashland. And so protecting that south face from development would be one of those goals.
Thank you. Second one was the property that Ms. Gunther brought up. And the area there seems to be of most interest for riparian reasons, because the creek is flowing right through there, and so protection of that space.
Is this 18 that we're talking about?
Number 7 on the
Okay,
map.
thank you.
So is preservation for the sake of preservation within the purview of Parks and Rec as well, as opposed to land, property that can then be opened up for purposes of recreation and is compatible with use by people and their dogs.
So now to make sure I understand the question, are you asking if APRC has identified any lands that are solely for conservation purposes?
Yeah. Does APRC have a part of it that makes it essentially a land conservancy?
I don't think it's out of the question, but I'm not aware of any lands that are identified in here that don't also have a recreational or trail or connectivity purpose. There are, of course, there are conservation easements like Siskiyou Mountain Park, where the Southern Oregon Land Conservancy has given the land to be managed again for multiple benefits. But I guess my answer would be is that APRC is always going to be looking for multiple benefits. So conservation would include potential recreational use. Of course, dogs, for example, or various human impacts, if they were deemed to be incompatible with those conservation and preservation values, we would consider excluding those from those areas. So dogs aren't allowed in Lithia Park, dogs are not allowed in North Mountain Park. And my understanding is that the reasoning behind that was because they're considered wildlife sanctuaries where we don't necessarily want to disturb bird watchers like birds and other critters in the area.
Well, dogs was just a choice that came to the top of my head at the moment when I mentioned it. Are there no other entities within Ashland that are looking to preserve properties like riparian edges along the stream and things like that? Are you in competition with anybody else out there for doing this?
That's a good question. Not that I'm aware of. I'm aware of course, like Ashland Watershed Trails Association. I think they have and have considered purchasing property basically for the same purposes as APRC. And I'm sure that we do have the Southern Oregon Land Conservancy and other land conservancy organizations, but I've never seen an instance where we would be in competition. Generally, land conservancies are looking for very, very large pieces of parcels of land instead of tiny ones that just connect, one neighborhood from another. So our strategies might be very different from a land conservancy.
Okay. And just full disclosure, I'm actually working with Southern Oregon Land Conservancy, so I steward one of their properties.
They're wonderful. We work very closely with Christy Mergenthaler and Lindia on Siskiyou Mountain Park, and just recently met Steve, the new
Steve Weiss.
Yes, was with the Working with Tribes conference, and we had a great conversation. I hope we can work with them more, and it's been great working with them on. I'm sure you're all aware of the large fuels management project that's going to be going on in Siskiyou Mountain Park, and that has been a lot of walking around with Southern Oregon Land Conservancy and looking at trees and trying to figure out what's best for the forest there. So.
Yeah, well, the purpose of my questions, Leslie, is really just, you in the role that you're in right now, I'm sure, the constraints that you have to work under with not just the timing of the availability of the property, but whether or not the money is going to be there to actually purchase it, makes for some very interesting decisions as you try to predict what's going to happen. And if your scope is broader and broader, then that gets, in my opinion, harder to then manage.
Yes, that's a good point. I can say that I can leave that to the commissioners to decide, since that is their decision. But
thank you.
But following on that, I do think it is a very important topic, and I also have property in Sun River, so I tend to compare the two places. They're about the same size. Sun River has a natural resources department that is specifically responsible for, conservancy. Let me put it that way, in the broad way. And, my observation is that I think it would be an important topic for whomever are the right organizations, where it's the council or whomever, to think about this, because as the parks begin to move towards conservancy in the riparian areas and so forth, I think that would be a valuable part of the potential plan, which also leads me to, so in your engagement with other organizations, did one of them include with the Chamber of Commerce strategy? And I'm thinking in particular about the strategy of Ashland as a base camp for outdoor activities.
I've talked with Sandra, and I've been invited to attend some of the Chamber of Commerce meetings, specifically actually around activating parks and utilizing parks for cultural purposes. But I'm well aware of those sorts of economic diversification efforts, and I think the commissioners on parks feel that they have an important role to play in that, and are trying to work with the city to make sure that those goals of kind of turning Ashland into a bit more of an outdoor recreation hub. I'm excited about those ideas, and I think that it's something that parks can and should be working with the city to achieve.
Did the Rogue Valley Mountain Bike Association provide any specific recommendations into the plan? Because that's obviously a very active area. I've been told that people with big dollars travel specifically to Ashland to shop for bikes and to try out bikes, but I'm not sure that where the pathways stand, for example. Again, it's not like Mount Bachelor where they're organized mountain biking pathways and challenge courses and things like that.
So we had on the subcommittee, we had a representative from Ashland Watershed Trails Association, AWTA, which is primarily pedestrian, running, hiking, trails group, but they're probably the oldest trails group in Ashland, very successful in building most of the trails in the watershed. And then representing the mountain biking community was Eric Hansen, who's now a city councilor, of course, and actually I would say myself to a certain extent as well. I was on the board of RVMBA for about a year, but both Eric and I have worked very closely with the Mountain Bike Trail Association, and we're with RVMBA, and we've been in contact with them and read their sustainability plan. So I think we very well covered sort of their interests in terms of land acquisition for trails. Of course, our biggest obstacle, but also opportunity, is really the relationship with the Forest Service, because there's only so much trails and so much density that we can put in and still make it a wonderful place to experience wilderness within the lower watershed. My personal opinion is that in the future, a stronger relationship with the Forest Service and working with them to allow events and things like Ashland Devo is a youth mountain biking program that is really kind of exploding in this town. Figuring out how to work with the Forest Service so that those opportunities can be taken.
Okay. And one last question. So the 2012 plan, was there a particular reason why it didn't proceed? I think I read that it was presented to the council, but were there objections to it? Was there just a lack of momentum? Just curious about that.
I don't know.
Yeah, my recollection, and it's not complete, but that in working on the 2002-2012 plan, by the time 2012 rolled around, a number of properties have been acquired. The intent of the 2012 light update was to modify that map to show those properties as now acquired as opposed to aspirational. So it didn't go through a formal adoption process because it wasn't, in my recollection, as far-reaching in terms of identifying many new properties to acquire. I think that the current plan does a combination of removing items that were on that prior plan so that it's clear what's currently being desired in terms of acquisition, and really codifying that by adoption through the comprehensive plan then sets forth a map that can be used in a policymaking as a policymaking tool, as well as Director Eldridge mentioned, in order to acquire properties if the opportunities arise. I know our comprehensive plan indicates that the city will work voluntarily with property owners in order to acquire properties. And if they're identified on the plan, that then gives the Parks Department the ability to reach out when the property comes up for sale and pursue it. And so I think that's why the 2012 update wasn't a full review process, because I don't think it went as far as the current proposal that's before you.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, I do, having grown up in Ashland, in the days where any vacant lot was considered a park, and
Was my town.
the TID was our pathway to adventure and things like that. I do think that, you know, the progress in terms of basic accessibility to parks is really, you know, very impressive, as well as what I see here as a pivot to the connectivity and conservation and the intentional aspects of that. And, you know, if anything, I would just push a little bit more on what the future really looks like in terms of the kinds of recreation that are, you know, that will help to differentiate Ashland and serve its total community, including people coming in from the outside, as you go forward. Not so much in the actual properties, but perhaps how they're used and the relationship with the Forest Service, I guess I would say.
Yeah. Thank you.
And sorry, one final thing. There is, I think, a persistent typo in the documents, and I'm trying to find it. Roca Cannon, as opposed to Canyon.
Oh, that's one I haven't caught.
It says Roca Cannon a couple of times.
Oh, I thought it was a book.
That having been one of our pathways up to the TID, living down below there, so you might just search for the word cannon with two N's.
Spell check.
Maybe it's the tilde over the N. It's the, we'll fix that.
Yeah, and then Croman is excluded. It will be treated on its own.
So, no, not necessarily. I think that the Parks and Open Space Plan identifies number 18 as the need for a park in that vicinity.
Okay.
When Croman Corporation comes in for a modification of their master plan, they'll identify areas that could function as parks. They may not precisely align with number 18 in those tax lots, but they may satisfy the intent. So I know that they've reached out to Director Eldridge to talk about the property, Townmakers LLC rather, has reached out to the Parks Department to talk about the identified areas where the pond are, as well as the central park, and whether those satisfy that criteria or not would be a decision point for parks to see if, at a future update, if number 18 would come off the list.
But in the meantime, the city proposing to come to the table with some
well, the city
parkland in the area.
city would identify that our current, as well as the proposed open space, Parks and Open Space Plan identifies the need for a park in that area. And if those parcels are part of that development proposal, it would be a question that the applicant would have to answer as part of how they're addressing that need. So, and on a 61-acre property, they likely could do so.
Okay. I'm sorry, I do have one more question. What does no fiscal impact mean?
So that is essentially, I used the city council memo format, and it just asks to provide any fiscal impacts, but in terms of creating the plan and putting into the Ashland comprehensive plan itself, putting the map into the plan, that has no fiscal
of
impact.
the plan
but of course,
itself versus
yes,
the actions that are proposed by the plan.
correct.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Do you have one more?
No. Would you like the floor?
I think-
Gentlemen. Because I do have one more, but,
All my questions have been answered, so.
okay. Just to toss one out on Ms. Gunther's email, and this is sort of a combination to Eldridge and staff. Is there anything about designating property as an area of interest by Parks and Rec that would get in the way of a private individual doing a rebuild on a property? Because I may be misunderstanding what was said in this note, but that's the way I read this, is there was concern in that space.
So Derek's pulled up a map. The short answer to your question is no.
Okay.
A property owner has the vested rights of the ownership of the property. The plan gives the city the ability to make an offer to purchase the property or request an easement. It's not a compulsory dedication. That said, this area was part of the normal neighborhood plan. You see at the bottom of the map on the left where it says NMR17.5 and NM-G. That's essentially the property that's in question.
Right.
So the property was anticipated to develop out with a number of housing, 2 new streets going through, and a large extension of the greenway that was established to the north next to Kestrel. Derek, if you could show the next picture. So there is where Bear Creek runs through, and so the intention in developing that plan is an acknowledgement that that area is within a floodplain and as such is not developable, and so could be dedicated to parks, which was what was done to the north of this on Kestrel. I think the concern articulated by Amy Gunter is that with the entirety of that parcel being identified as a potential park area, wanting to ensure that that didn't preclude the urbanization of the portion of it above. And it would not unless Parks voluntarily worked out an agreement with the property owner to acquire it. I think that the city would still be concerned in terms of the connections of our transportation connectivities through that property because it's anticipated to connect Kestrel on down over to Mountain Street.
I keep hearing about that.
Yeah, so that road connection would still be something that was identified in the master plan that we'd be looking at, regardless of whether it was developed by the private property owner or developed as a park, that connection be addressed in some manner. So
I just wanted to make certain I hadn't missed. I've missed a lot. I'm still learning this stuff, so thank you.
The city can't require that connection to go through that private property, can they? Is there a right-of-way?
There's not a right-of-way, but in terms of if a property owner is to develop it, they have to develop it consistent with the master plan that was adopted, and the master plan identifies roads.
They're talking about replacing that one house. If
Right.
they replace that one house as part of a planning, is that part of a planning action that would require them to put that road through?
No, but it would require that the house that they're replacing doesn't preclude that access. So.
I might take just a quick moment to mention that I have been, my understanding is that Parks has not looked at their system development charges, STC fees, for something like 20 or 30 years. And to the best of my ability, despite all the searching and looking through archives, I've been unable to find an SDC methodology that really talks about the amount of open space and parks that would be required for certain population or acreage. And so just to let you know, one of my intent is to try to establish a more to establish an SDC, work with a consultant to have an SDC methodology so that there really are consistent and reasonable science behind some of these decisions as well. So the quarter mile goal is wonderful and has been primarily achieved, but I think we really need a solid SDC methodology that can feed into some of these decisions as well, and that can help to fund them as we discussed those challenges.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
So I will note that we are scheduled to come back December 12th for a public hearing for this, for anybody that's listening at home. So we'll be
and
working.
the students in the SOU land in the land use planning class. Hi guys.
Yeah.
We all have been presenting to them.
Yeah, and so at that point, we'll be coming back to you, not just with the maps, but with a draft ordinance that we'd be seeking a recommendation from this commission to go forward to the city council.
Okay.
Great, we'll look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We have open discussion. Anybody have anything to talk about? If not, would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second? Thank you. Moved and seconded. And all those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Good session.